The night Nate Sheridan died, the desert wind carried the smell of burning metal and blood. Sloan Calder pressed her back against the crumbling, mud-waller rifle, steady breathing, controlled. 20 meters ahead, the compound door hung open like a wound. Inside, 2 American hostages waited. Outside, 12 insurgents stood between her team and extraction. She had counted them twice. 12 shadows moving through the darkness. 12 heartbeats standing between life and death. The moon hung low over the Yemeni highlands, casting silver light across the rocky terrain. Her earpiece crackled with static, then Chief Petty Officer Nate Sheridan's voice cut through the noise. Overwatch has eyes on 4 Tango's north wall. 2 more circling east. You're clear to move on my mark. Sloan adjusted her grip on the M4. Her fingers found the familiar grooves, the worn spots where countless hours of training had shaped the weapon to her hand. She was the only woman in this unit, the first female operator, embedded with a Tier 1 Black Ops team. Every mission she felt the weight of that distinction. Not as burden, but as purpose. Copy Overwatch, standing by. Nate Sheridan had been her mentor since Bud's training. When other instructors questioned whether a woman belonged in the teams, Nate had simply pointed to her scores. Top of the class in marksmanship, second in land navigation, first in the psychological evaluation that weeded out those who cracked under pressure. She doesn't need your approval, he had told a skeptical commander once. She needs your respect, and she'll earn it whether you like it or not. Now 3 years and countless operations later, she had earned far more than respect. She had earned a place in the shadows where America's quiet wars were fought and won. Mark, go loud. Sloan moved. The first insurgent fell before he heard her footsteps. The second turned just in time to see the muzzle flash. She cleared the doorway in a fluid motion, years of muscle memory guiding each step, each shot, each breath. The hostages were in the back room, bound but alive. A man and woman, both aid workers captured 3 weeks prior. Their eyes widened at the sight of her, at the American flag patch barely visible beneath the dust on her vest. United States Navy, she said quietly, we're taking you home. Extraction was clean until it wasn't. They were 50 meters from the helicopter when the RPG streaked across the night sky. The explosion threw Sloan sideways, her helmet cracking against stone. For a moment, the world dissolved into ringing silence and dancing spots of light. Then Nate's voice, urgent now, cutting through the haze. Sloan, move, we've got incoming. She scrambled to her feet, dragging one of the hostages with her. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. The insurgents had reinforcements, more than intel had suggested, more than they could handle in open terrain. The helicopter's rotors screamed overhead. 20 meters to safety. 15. 10. She felt the impact before she heard the shot. Not her own body, but the weight of another slamming into her from behind, knocking her the final distance to the chopper's open door. Nate Sheridan had taken the bullet meant for her. Go, he shouted, blood already spreading across his chest. Get them out. I'm not leaving you. His hand found hers, grip weakening by the second. His eyes, those steady eyes that had guided her through hell and back, found hers one last time. Protect them, Sloan. The ones who can't protect themselves. Promise me. The medic pulled her back. The door gunner opened fire, covering their escape. And as the helicopter lifted into the Yemeni sky, Sloan watched the man who had believed in her when no one else did disappear into the darkness below. She kept her promise. 3 weeks later, she was given a new mission. Admiral James Crawford's office at Naval Special Warfare Command was sparse, functional, exactly what you'd expect from a man who had spent 40 years in service. No photographs on the walls, no personal effects on the desk, just maps, briefings, and the quiet hum of machinery that never slept. Sloan stood at attention, her dress uniform crisp despite the August heat. The wounds from Yemen had healed, at least the visible ones. The others would take longer. At ease, Lieutenant. She relaxed her posture, but not her vigilance. Crawford was not a man who summoned officers for casual conversation. I've read your after-action report from Yemen, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Exemplary work under impossible circumstances. Chief Sheridan's sacrifice will be honored appropriately. Thank you, sir. Crawford studied her for a long moment. His eyes held the particular weariness of command, the weight of sending young men and women into harm's way and living with the consequences. I have a new assignment for you, unofficial. Off the books. Sloan's interest sharpened. Sir, Fort Barrow, Arizona. training installation for officer candidates and enlisted personnel. On paper, it's a model facility. High graduation rates, positive evaluations, the whole package. He paused, reaching for another folder. But we've received reports, anonymous tips mostly, allegations of systematic hazing, abuse of recruits, and a command structure that looks the other way. 3 complaints were filed in the past 18 months. All 3 were buried before they reached my desk. Sloan took the folder, scanning its contents. Incident reports marked classified. Medical records with suspicious gaps. Names redacted, dates obscured, a paper trail designed to lead nowhere. What happened to the complainants? 2 requested transfers. 1 was medically discharged. Crawford's jaw tightened. A female cadet, 19 years old. Official cause was a training accident. Fell during drills. But the photographs don't match the story. Sloan looked at the images. Bruises on the ribs, the arms, the face. Patterns that spoke of fists, not falls. Her stomach turned not with weakness, but with cold, focused anger. Why me, sir? Because you're unknown there. No history with Fort Barrow, no connections to its command. And because you understand what it means to be underestimated. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. You're not going there to train, Lieutenant. You're going there to watch. Observe leadership protocols, identify the source of these incidents, and gather evidence. The Inspector General's office will conduct a routine visit in 2 weeks. By then, I need to know if Fort Barrow is what it claims to be or something else entirely. Sloan closed the folder. Rules of engagement. Minimal footprint. You'll enter as a transfer from Coronado, name slightly altered to avoid database flags. No rank insignia, no SEAL identification. Just another new face learning the ropes. And if the situation escalates, Crawford held her gaze, then you do what you have always done, Lieutenant. You adapt, you overcome, and you protect those who cannot protect themselves. Nate's words echoing through another man's voice. Understood, sir. One more thing. Crawford reached into his desk drawer, producing a small device no larger than a button. Encrypted recorder, audio only but admissible in military tribunal. Use it wisely. Sloan took the device, weighing it in her palm. Such a small thing to carry such enormous consequence. When do I leave? Tomorrow morning. Your cover documentation is already in the system. As far as Fort Barrow knows, you're Calder Sloan, transfer from basic underwater demolition training, awaiting permanent assignment. She almost smiled. A SEAL posing as someone who had washed out of SEAL training. There was irony in that, dark and appropriate. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't. Crawford stood, extending his hand. Watch your back out there, Lieutenant. Whatever's happening at Fort Barrow, someone's working hard to keep it hidden. That kind of effort usually means there's something worth hiding. The bus to Fort Barrow rattled through the Arizona desert, kicking up dust that painted the windows in shades of ochre and rust. Sloan sat near the back, her duffel bag wedged against the seat beside her. Inside that bag, sewn into a hidden pocket along the seam, was the trident patch Nate Sheridan had worn on his final mission. She hadn't asked for it. One of the team members, a quiet operator named Davis, had pressed it into her hands at the memorial service. He would have wanted you to have this, Davis had said. He talked about you like you were the future of the teams, said you'd go further than any of us. The patch was frayed now, edges worn from the years of service. It had seen deserts and jungles, frozen mountains and burning cities. It had witnessed courage and sacrifice, loss and redemption. And now it would witness whatever waited at Fort Barrow. The bus hissed to a stop at the main gate. Through the dusty window, Sloan observed the installation's layout. Parade grounds baking under the late August sun. Barracks arranged in neat rows. Administrative buildings, motor pool, mess hall. Everything in its proper place, everything projecting order and discipline. But she knew better than anyone that surfaces could deceive. The gate guard was young, barely out of his teens. He checked his clipboard with the careful attention of someone still learning his job. Cole Avery. He frowned at the manifest. Wait, no, Calder Sloan, transfer from Coronado, temporary assignment. Sloan nodded, saying nothing. The guard squinted at her. Something in her stillness, the way her posture didn't shift, even as trucks rumbled by, made him pause. Most transfers fidgeted, looked around, asked questions. This one just waited, steady as stone. You can go through, he finally said, waving her past. Check in with Administration Building 7. They'll get you sorted. She stepped through the gate duffel slung over one shoulder. The weight of Nate's patch pressed against her side, a quiet reminder of why she was here. The parade ground stretched before her, cadets moving in formation beneath the unforgiving sun. Their boots pounded in rhythm, a heartbeat of discipline and tradition. Instructors shouted commands, their voices carrying across the open space with practiced authority. Sloan walked the perimeter, observing without appearing to observe. A skill honed through years of reconnaissance, the ability to see everything while seeming to notice nothing. She noticed the way male cadets tracked her with their eyes. Not with respect, but with assessment, measuring her, categorizing her, dismissing her. New girl, easy target. She noticed the female cadets who walked in groups never alone. Survival instinct, whether they recognized it or not. She noticed the instructors who saw the watching and said nothing. And she noticed one cadet in particular. Tessa Whitmore stood apart from the others, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. 19 years old, according to the files Sloan had memorized. Friend and roommate of Kira Holloway, the cadet who had been injured in a training accident 2 months prior. Even from a distance, Sloan could see the fading bruises on Tessa's wrists. Yellow-green, almost healed, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Someone had grabbed this girl, hard enough to leave marks, recently enough that the evidence still showed. Sloan filed the observation away, adding it to the growing picture of Fort Barrow's hidden reality. Administration was efficient, impersonal. She signed forms, received her bunk assignment, collected her schedule. The clerk barely looked at her, too busy with paperwork to notice another nameless transfer passing through. That anonymity was exactly what she needed. Her bunk was in Barracks C, a concrete building that had seen better decades. The beds were metal frames with thin mattresses, the kind that turned soldiers into light sleepers out of self-defense. Sloan chose a bed near the back corner, a position that offered clear sight lines to both exits. Old habits, the kind that kept operators alive. She spent the afternoon settling in, maintaining her cover. Attended an orientation briefing that told her nothing she didn't already know. Ate dinner in the mess hall, surrounded by cadets who talked too loudly and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Watched the social dynamics play out, identifying the leaders, the followers, the outcasts, the predators. The four who would later corner her behind the vehicle depot sat 3 tables away. Bryce Kellner, the apparent leader, held court with the easy confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. His 3 companions hung on his words, laughed at his jokes, followed his lead. Sloan memorized their faces, their body language, their patterns. They noticed her too. She saw Kellner's eyes flick in her direction, saw the smirk that crossed his face. New target acquired. Easy prey. He had no idea what he was looking at. Night fell over Fort Barrow like a curtain dropping on a stage. The desert air cooled rapidly, temperature plunging as the sun surrendered to darkness. Sloan lay on her bunk, waiting, listening to the sounds of the base settling into sleep. At 21:45, she rose, changed into her PT uniform, tucked the encrypted recorder into her collar. The vehicle depot was exactly where she expected trouble to find her, isolated, poorly lit, away from the main traffic patterns. The kind of place where incidents happened and witnesses conveniently failed to appear. She walked there deliberately, making no effort to hide her route. If they were watching, and she knew they were, she wanted them to see her. Wanted them to think she was naive, unaware, vulnerable. The floodlights flickered, casting irregular shadows across the rows of Humvees and transport trucks. The smell of diesel and motor oil hung heavy in the still air. Her boots made soft sounds on the packed earth, measured steps that betrayed nothing of the alertness coiled inside her. They emerged from behind a Humvee at 2200 exactly. 4 shapes separating from the darkness, arranged in a loose semicircle designed to cut off escape routes. Bryce Kellner stepped forward, first, his grin visible even in the dim light. "Hey, new girl." Sloan stopped, turned to face him with the calm of someone who had faced far worse than schoolyard bullies in uniform. "Orientation's over there." He jerked his thumb toward the main compound, voice dripping with mock helpfulness. "You lost." The others spread out around her, Tanner circling to her right, Porter and Mitchell covering the flanks. Standard intimidation tactics, the kind learned from older cadets and passed down like a poisoned inheritance. Sloan said nothing, just stood there, hands loose at her sides, watching them with an expression that gave nothing away. "You look tense." Tanner moved closer, close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath. Drinking on base, another violation to add to the list. Need a hand unpacking? They laughed. The sound echoed off the metal hulls of the vehicles, hollow and ugly. Porter grabbed her duffel bag, yanking it from her shoulder. She let it go without resistance. Not yet. What's in here? He rifled through the contents, tossing clothes onto the ground. Anything interesting? Love letters from Mommy? Maybe some. His hand found the hidden pocket, found the frayed edge of Nate's trident patch. What's this? He pulled it free, holding it up to the light. Navy SEAL insignia. You steal this from somewhere new, girl. Sloane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the cold rage building inside her. That doesn't belong to you, she said quietly. Put it back. Or what? Kellner stepped closer, emboldened by her apparent passivity. You'll report us. Go cry to the instructors. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. Newsflash, sweetheart. The instructors don't care. Nobody does. You're just another transfer, another nameless face who will wash out in 6 weeks. Might as well learn your place now. His hand reached for her shoulder fingers, closing with deliberate roughness. That was his mistake. Time slowed. Sloane's body moved before conscious thought, pure reflex, honed through years of combat training. Her left hand intercepted his wrist fingers, locking around the joint with surgical precision. A sharp twist, 45 degrees, counterclockwise, applying pressure to the ulnar nerve, while simultaneously hyperextending the elbow. The technique was called a standing armbar. Properly executed, it caused immediate, overwhelming pain while minimizing permanent damage. It was designed for situations exactly like this, neutralizing a threat without escalating to lethal force. Kellner's knees buckled. A strangled gasp escaped his lips as his brain struggled to process the sudden, shocking reversal of power dynamics. One moment he was the predator. The next he was on his knees, arm locked at an angle that promised agony if he moved. Tanner reacted first, lunging forward with a wild punch. Amateur technique telegraphed a full second before it arrived. Sloane pivoted, using Kellner's body as a shield while releasing him in a controlled drop. Her right foot swept low, catching Tanner's lead ankle at the precise moment his weight shifted forward. Physics did the rest. His feet left the ground and his back slammed into the packed earth with a sound like a side of beef hitting a butcher's block. Porter dropped the duffel bag and charged. She sidestepped, caught his extended arm, used his momentum to guide him face first into the side of a Humvee. The impact left a dent in the sheet metal and a dazed expression on his face. Mitchell, the smartest of the four, tried to run. She let him get 3 steps before her hand closed on his collar. A simple hip throw, the kind taught in basic combatives but rarely executed with such technical perfection. He landed hard, the air leaving his lungs in a single explosive grunt. 8 seconds. 4 opponents neutralized. Not a single wasted movement. Sloane stood in the center of the carnage, breathing controlled, heart rate barely elevated. Around her, 4 young men groaned and gasped, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Kellner clutched his shoulder, the joint not dislocated, but screaming with pain nonetheless. His face had gone pale, the arrogant grin replaced by something closer to fear. What the hell are you? Sloane walked over to where Porter lay and retrieved the trident patch from his loosened grip. She held it for a moment, thumb tracing the familiar worn edges before tucking it carefully back into her duffel. Then she turned to face Kellner, her voice soft but carrying an edge that cut deeper than any blade. You don't touch soldiers without permission. Ever. He scrambled backward, hands raised in surrender. It was just a joke, all right. You didn't mean what? She took a step forward and he flinched. Didn't mean to intimidate, didn't mean to threaten, didn't mean to put your hands on someone who hadn't given you that right. Her gaze swept across all 4 of them, not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. The kind a parent shows when a child fails to learn an obvious lesson. Consider this your education and consequences. Next time you decide to welcome a new arrival, remember how it felt to be on the ground looking up. She slung the duffel over her shoulder and walked away, leaving them in the dust and silence of the depot yard. None of them saw the slight smile that crossed her face as she disappeared into the darkness. She hated violence, truly hated it. But discipline, she believed, was love in uniform, and sometimes love required hard lessons. By morning, the whispers had spread through Fort Barrow like wildfire through dry brush. Did you hear the new girl took down 4 Bravo guys? No way. By herself. I heard she's CIA. Black Ops or something. I heard she's Special Forces. Maybe Delta. Don't be stupid. Women can't be in Delta. Then explain how 4 cadets ended up in the infirmary. In the mess hall, the breakfast crowd buzzed with speculation. Sloan ate her oatmeal in silence, maintaining the same unremarkable presence she had cultivated since arrival. But now the looks were different. Curiosity mixed with wariness. Fear lurking beneath the surface of casual glances. The 4 cadets were conspicuously absent from morning formation. By 0900, Captain Dean Rawlings had heard every version of the story that existed. He sat in his office, a leather and metal shrine to 30 years of military service, reading the incident reports with a growing sense of unease. Rawlings was not a bad man by most measurements. He had served honorably in Desert Storm, earning decorations for valor and leadership. He had risen through the ranks on merit, commanding respect through competence rather than intimidation. But somewhere along the line, the institution he loved had asked him to make compromises. Small ones at first, looking the other way when senior cadets got too rough with newcomers, adjusting reports to minimize embarrassing incidents, protecting the reputation of Fort Barrow at the cost of individual justice. Each compromise had seemed reasonable in isolation. Each had eroded something essential in his character. Now he was trapped. The Inspector General's office was sniffing around, asking questions about hazing incidents. Brass in Washington wanted the situation contained, the narrative controlled. And a mysterious transfer from Coronado had just embarrassed 4 cadets and drawn exactly the kind of attention he had spent 18 months trying to avoid. His aide knocked twice before entering. "Sir, the transfer you asked about, Calder Sloan." I pulled her file. Rawlings took the folder, scanning its contents with increasing alarm. Basic underwater demolition training at Coronado. Exceptional fitness scores. Psychological evaluation indicating high stress tolerance and advanced tactical reasoning. And buried in the classified addendum, accessible only to command-level officers, Special Operations Liaison Naval Command. Evaluation assignment. Report directly to Admiral James Crawford. He closed the folder slowly. "Get her in here, now." Sloan entered Rawlings' office at 0930, her expression neutral as a blank page. She stood at attention, eyes fixed on a point 6 inches above the captain's head, the perfect image of military discipline. Rawlings didn't look up from the papers on his desk. A power play classic and transparent. "Lieutenant Cole," he said, then caught himself. Or should I say Lieutenant Calder, Special Operations Liaison Naval Command. So he had access to the classified files. Interesting. "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. This wasn't some random transfer who had gotten lucky in a fight. This was a trained operator sent by powers above his pay grade with an agenda he couldn't control. "You were sent here under evaluation orders to monitor cadet discipline, assess leadership protocols." "Yes, sir." "And instead," his voice hardened, "you've given me a brawl. 4 cadets injured, 2 of them requiring medical attention. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Sloan met his eyes for the first time since entering the room. "It looks like the pattern you were warned about continues, sir. Hazing, intimidation, unchecked behavior." His jaw tightened. "You think you can fix this with your fist?" "No, sir." Her voice didn't rise, but the steel in it could have cut through the tension like a blade. "I fixed it by showing them what accountability feels like." Rawlings stood abruptly, circling behind her in a move designed to intimidate. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't react at all. "You overstepped your assignment." "With respect, sir." Her tone remained perfectly level. "I fulfilled it. My orders were to assess leadership response to disciplinary incidents. 4 cadets attempted to assault a fellow soldier on your installation. My response demonstrated both the inadequacy of existing deterrence and the potential consequences of unchecked aggression." He completed his circle, stopping directly in front of her. Close enough to loom, close enough to threaten. She remained unmoved. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lieutenant. There are forces at work here that you don't understand." "Then help me understand, sir." The question hung in the air between them, an invitation or a challenge depending on how he chose to receive it. Rawlings studied her face, searching for weakness, for doubt, for any crack in the armor of professional composure. He found nothing but steady resolve. You want to understand, his voice dropped, taking on an almost conspiratorial tone. Here's what I understand. Fort Barrow graduates over 1,000 soldiers annually. Our completion rate is 15% above the national average. Our alumni include 3 generals, 2 admirals, and a secretary of defense. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens through discipline, through standards, through a culture that weeds out the weak and elevates the strong. And the incidents, sir, the complaints that never reach official channels? His expression flickered. Just for a moment, but she caught it. Guilt quickly suppressed. Every training environment has friction. Some cadets can't handle pressure. They make accusations, file complaints, look for someone to blame for their own inadequacies. Part of leadership is managing that noise, separating legitimate concerns from the whining of those who don't belong here in the first place. Like Kira Holloway. The name landed like a grenade. Rawlings' face went still. The careful mask of authority suddenly rigid. That matter was investigated and closed. Training accident. The cadet in question has been medically discharged. I've seen the medical photographs, sir. Those injuries weren't consistent with a fall during drills. Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. When Rawlings spoke again, his voice had changed. Colder now, more calculating. Lieutenant Calder, you're new here. You don't understand the politics, the pressures, the compromises required to maintain an institution of this caliber. I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider your approach. He moved to his desk, pulling a folder from the top drawer. Go back to your barracks. Write a report that confirms Fort Barrow's adherence to proper protocols. The Inspector General's visit will proceed smoothly. Everyone will receive commendations for their excellent work, and you'll return to Coronado with a positive evaluation on your record. He held out the folder, a prepared template for exactly the report he described. Take this as a gesture of good faith, a recognition that we're both professionals who understand how the system works. Sloan didn't move to take the folder. And if I decline, sir, Rawlings' eyes hardened, then I'll have no choice but to report that you initiated an unprovoked assault on 4 cadets under my command. Your word against theirs, Lieutenant, and I think you'll find that my word carries significant weight in the circles that matter. The threat was clear. Play along or be destroyed. Sloan remained silent for a long moment, appearing to consider her options. In reality, she was making mental notes. The offer of complicity, the threat of retaliation. All of it potential evidence of corruption. I understand, sir. May I have some time to consider my decision? You have until tomorrow morning. 0800. Report to my office with your answer. She saluted crisply. Yes, sir. Dismissed. She turned and walked out, her reflection briefly visible in the glass plaque behind Rawlings' desk. The words etched there seemed to mock the conversation that had just concluded, honor above all. That night at 2300, Sloan positioned herself in the shadows outside the officers' lounge. A calculated risk, but necessary. Rawlings had shown his hand in their meeting. Now she needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. The lounge occupied a corner of the administrative building, its windows offering a clear view of the parade ground. Through the glass, she could see 2 figures seated in leather chairs, drinks in hand. Captain Dean Rawlings and Major Garrison Holt. She couldn't hear their words through the glass, but their body language spoke volumes. Rawlings was agitated, gesturing sharply. Holt nodded along, his expression calculating, predatory. Moving carefully, Sloan circled to the building's rear entrance. A maintenance corridor ran behind the lounge, accessible through a service door she had identified during her earlier reconnaissance. The lock was old mechanical. 30 seconds with a pick got her inside. The corridor was dark, musty, clearly unused for years. She navigated by memory and instinct, counting doors, until she reached the one that backed against the lounge's interior wall. An air vent provided both cover and acoustic transmission. She pressed herself against the wall, activated the encrypted recorder, and listened. Can't have her digging. Rawlings' voice tense and worried. If she finds out about the Holloway situation about the others, we're both finished. She's one officer. Holt's response was calmer, more controlled. Naval liaison on a 2-week evaluation. We've handled bigger problems. You don't understand. She's not some paper pusher from Washington. Did you see what she did to Kellner's Group 4 trained cadets, and she put them down like they were nothing? That's not standard training. That's Tier 1 capability. So she knows how to fight doesn't mean she knows how to investigate. She asked about Holloway by name in my office to my face. She's already found something. A pause, the clink of ice in a glass. What do you want me to do? Rawlings' voice dropped lower. The IG visit is in 12 days. Whatever she's found, whatever she's planning, we need to neutralize it before then. Reassign her somewhere quiet. Get her off the base, off the radar. And if she doesn't go quietly, another pause. Longer this time. Then we make sure she has bigger problems than Fort Barrow. Accidents happen in training environments, equipment failures, miscommunications in the field. It would be unfortunate if a transfer from Coronado were injured before completing her evaluation. Sloane's blood ran cold. They were discussing more than cover-ups now. They were discussing eliminating her as a threat. I'll handle it, Holt said. I know some people who can apply pressure without leaving marks. Former contractors, current mercenaries. They'll make her understand the wisdom of cooperation. Do it quietly. Nothing that traces back to this office. Understood, sir. The conversation shifted to logistics, scheduling details that confirmed the scope of their conspiracy. Sloane recorded every word, her mind already cataloging the evidence, planning her next moves. When she finally slipped back out through the maintenance corridor, the night had grown colder. Or perhaps it was just the weight of what she had heard settling into her bones. Rawlings and Holt weren't just covering up hazing incidents. They were running a protection racket, shielding perpetrators, silencing victims, and preparing to use violence against anyone who threatened their authority. Fort Barrow's rot went deeper than Admiral Crawford had imagined, and now she was in their crosshairs. Sloane walked back to her barracks, each step deliberate, mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. She had evidence now enough to prove conspiracy, if not the underlying crimes. But evidence meant nothing if she didn't survive to present it. Tomorrow she would need to accelerate her investigation, find the physical proof that Rawlings was hiding, connect with potential witnesses, build a case strong enough to withstand whatever counterattack was coming. Tonight she would sleep with one eye open and a weapon within reach. In her duffel bag, Nate Sheridan's trident patch waited in its hidden pocket. She touched it briefly before climbing into her bunk, drawing strength from the memory of the man who had died so she could live. I'm keeping my promise, she whispered into the darkness. Whatever it takes. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched silent and vast beneath a canopy of indifferent stars. Somewhere in the barracks around her, 100 cadets slept unaware of the battle being waged in their midst. A battle for truth, for justice, for the soul of an institution that had lost its way. Sloane closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The sun rose over Fort Barrow like a wound opening across the eastern sky. Crimson light bled across the parade ground, casting long shadows that stretched toward the barracks like accusing fingers. Sloane had been awake for hours. She sat on her bunk back against the wall, watching the other cadets stir and stumble toward morning formation. Her body was still, but her mind raced through the evidence she had gathered, the recordings she had made, the patterns she was beginning to see. Rawlings and Holt were expecting her answer at 0800. They wanted her compliance, her silence, her participation in the cover-up. What they would get instead was a refusal that would accelerate their timeline. She had perhaps 48 hours before they moved against her directly. That meant 48 hours to find the proof that would bring them down. At 0745, she made her way to the administrative building. The morning air was already thick with heat, the promise of another scorching Arizona day. Cadets moved in formation across the parade ground, their boots raising small clouds of dust that hung in the still air like ghosts. Rawlings' aide showed her into the captain's office at exactly 0800. The man himself sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, expression carefully neutral. Major Garrison Holt stood by the window, arms crossed, watching her with predatory interest. Lieutenant Calder. Rawlings gestured to the chair facing his desk. Please sit. She remained standing. I prefer to stand, sir. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, quickly suppressed. As you wish. Have you considered our conversation from yesterday? I have, sir. And your decision? Sloane met his eyes directly. I'm afraid I cannot comply with your request. My orders come from Admiral Crawford, and my duty is to complete the evaluation I was assigned, honestly and thoroughly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Holt pushed off from the window, taking a step forward. That's a disappointing answer, Lieutenant. Perhaps, but it's the only answer my conscience will permit. Rawlings leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath him. His expression had shifted from neutral to calculating, the mask of professional courtesy giving way to something harder underneath. Conscience is a luxury, Lieutenant, one that often conflicts with practical reality. You're young, talented, with a promising career ahead of you. It would be unfortunate if that career were derailed by a misguided sense of moral absolutism. I appreciate your concern for my future, sir, but I've found that the only careers worth having are the ones built on principles worth keeping. Silence stretched between them. Three people in a room, each measuring the others, calculating risks and responses. Finally, Rawlings nodded slowly. Very well. You've made your position clear. I hope you understand that I've made mine as well. Perfectly, sir. Dismissed. She saluted and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Holt's voice stopped her. Lieutenant, a word of advice. She paused but didn't turn around. Fort Barrow can be a dangerous place for someone who doesn't understand its rules. Training accidents happen. Equipment fails. Sometimes people get hurt in ways that nobody could have predicted or prevented. Now she turned to meeting his gaze with an expression of perfect calm. Thank you for the warning, Major. I'll be sure to watch my step. She walked out without looking back, but inside her mind was already shifting into combat mode. The threat had been made explicit. The clock was ticking. Time to accelerate the investigation. The base records office occupied a cramped corner of the administrative building, staffed by a single clerk who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by paperwork. Sloan had identified it during her initial reconnaissance as a potential weak point in Fort Barrow's information security. Paper records were harder to alter than digital ones. They required physical access, careful work time that busy administrators rarely had. If the original incident reports still existed somewhere, they would be here buried in filing cabinets that hadn't been properly organized since the previous decade. The clerk, a corporal named Hendricks, barely glanced up when she entered. Help you. I'm looking for training incident reports, historical records going back about 2 years. Hendricks gestured vaguely toward a row of gray filing cabinets lining the back wall. Section C, 3rd and 4th cabinets. Knock yourself out. I need access authorization. You with the IG office. Evaluation team. Temporary assignment. He shrugged, pulling a form from his desk. Sign here, here, and initial here. You break it, you bought it. 5 minutes later, Sloan was alone among the filing cabinets, methodically working through folders that smelled of dust and institutional neglect. The organization system, if it could be called that, appeared to follow no discernible logic. Incident reports mixed with equipment requisitions, mixed with personnel evaluations, all crammed together in a bureaucratic archaeology site. She found the first discrepancy in the second cabinet. A training incident report dated 14 months ago involving a cadet named Marcus Webb. The official summary described a fall during an obstacle course drill, resulting in a fractured wrist and minor contusions. Standard accident, no disciplinary action required. But the medical attachment told a different story. The injury pattern noted by the attending physician described defensive wounds on the forearms consistent with someone protecting themselves from blows. The fracture angle suggested impact from above, not a fall onto level ground. Someone had beaten Marcus Webb and called it an accident. Sloan photographed the documents with her phone, then continued searching. The second case was worse. Cadet Jennifer Paulson, 11 months ago. Official report: heat exhaustion during a field exercise resulting in hospitalization. Medical notes: multiple contusions on the torso and thighs, dehydration consistent with being denied water access. Psychological evaluation recommending immediate discharge. Jennifer Paulson had been hazed nearly to death, and the official record had been sanitized to protect her attackers. By the time Sloan finished her search, she had documented 7 cases spanning 18 months. 7 cadets injured through hazing, intimidation, or assault. 7 cover-ups signed off by Captain Dean Rawlings. And then she found the Kira Holloway file. The original report was buried at the bottom of a misfiled stack, apparently overlooked during whatever cleaning operation had sanitized the official records. Sloan pulled it free with trembling fingers, already knowing what she would find, but dreading the confirmation. Kira Holloway, age 19. Admitted to base medical facility on June 15th following what the initial report described as an assault by multiple attackers. Injuries included 3 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, extensive bruising across the torso and face, and defensive lacerations on both hands. The attending physician's notes were damning. Patient reports being attacked by 4 male cadets in the equipment storage area following evening mess. Patient attempted to defend herself but was overpowered. Attackers threatened additional violence if patient reported the incident. Attached to the report was a photograph. Kira Holloway's face swollen and discolored. One eye completely shut, lips split in multiple places. A young woman who had joined the military to serve her country, brutalized by the very people who should have been her brothers in arms. Sloan stared at the image for a long moment, feeling the cold rage build inside her chest. This was what Rawlings was protecting. This was the truth he had buried beneath layers of falsified reports and institutional silence. The perpetrators were named in the original report. 4 cadets from Bravo Company, the same company that Bryce Kellner and his friends belonged to. The same pattern of behavior, the same culture of impunity, continuing unchecked because those in power chose to look away. She photographed everything. Every page, every note, every piece of evidence that the sanitized official record had tried to erase. Then she noticed something else. A handwritten note in the margin of the physician's report, barely legible. Patient has friend willing to provide corroborating testimony. See attached statement. But there was no attached statement. Someone had removed it. Tessa Whitmore. It had to be. Kira's roommate, her closest friend on base. The girl with the fading bruises on her wrists who walked alone and avoided eye contact. Sloan closed the filing cabinet and walked out of the records office, nodding to Corporal Hendricks as she passed. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket, loaded with evidence that could end careers and send people to prison. But evidence alone wasn't enough. She needed witnesses willing to testify. She needed Tessa Whitmore to find her courage. Finding Tessa proved more difficult than expected. The young cadet had become a ghost, appearing for mandatory formations and meals, but vanishing immediately afterward. She walked with her head down, shoulders hunched, the body language of someone trying desperately to be invisible. Sloan understood that posture. She had seen it in villages across Afghanistan and Iraq, and communities terrorized by forces they couldn't fight. The posture of the survivor, the one who had learned that drawing attention meant drawing danger. Breaking through that defensive shell would require patience, trust, and time she didn't have. She found her opportunity on the 3rd evening. Tessa sat alone in a corner of the recreation building, a paperback book open on her lap, but her eyes staring at nothing. The other cadets gave her a wide berth, whether out of respect or simply the instinct to avoid association with someone marked as a target. Sloan approached slowly, making sure Tessa could see her coming. No surprises, no sudden movements. The way you approached a wounded animal. Mind if I sit? Tessa's head jerked up, fear flashing across her features before settling into wary resignation. She recognized Sloan, of course. Everyone on base knew about the woman who had put 4 Bravo cadets in the infirmary. Free country. Sloan settled into the chair across from her, maintaining a comfortable distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. The recreation building hummed with the sounds of other cadets playing pool, watching television, pretending that Fort Barrow was a normal training facility. I knew Kira, Sloan said finally. Not personally, but I know what happened to her. Tessa's hands tightened on her book until her knuckles went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Sloan's voice was gentle but firm. You were there when they took her to medical. You saw the injuries. You knew they weren't from any training accident. I don't... Tessa's voice cracked. I can't... You gave a statement. I found the reference in the original report, but someone removed it before the file was sanitized. Tessa looked up sharply, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. How do you know about that? Because I'm not who they think I am. Sloan leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice. I was sent here to find out what's really happening at Fort Barrow, and I need your help to stop it. You don't understand. Tessa's whisper was barely audible. They warned me. After what happened, they told me that if I talked to anyone, the same thing would happen to me, or worse. Who warned you? Kellner and the others. They came to my room the night before Kira was discharged, told me that accidents happen all the time on military bases, told me that nobody would believe me anyway because Kira was gone, and it would be my word against theirs. It doesn't have to be just your word. Sloan pulled out her phone, showing Tessa the photograph. photographs of the original medical report. I have evidence, documentation that proves the cover-up. But I need someone who was there, someone who can testify to what really happened. Tessa stared at the screen, her face cycling through emotions. Pain, anger, fear, and beneath it all a flicker of something that might have been hope. Even if I talked, even if I told everything, they just bury it again. Rawlings has connections, people in Washington who protect him. He's been doing this for years and nobody's ever been able to touch him. Things are different now. The Inspector General is coming in less than 2 weeks. I have a direct line to Naval Command, and I have proof that can't be ignored or explained away. She reached across the table, taking Tessa's hand in hers. I know you're scared. You have every right to be. But Kira deserved better than what happened to her. And so do the cadets who are going to come after you, the ones who will face the same choice between silence and suffering. Someone has to break the cycle, Tessa. Someone has to be brave enough to speak the truth. Tears spilled down Tessa's cheeks. Her hand trembled in Sloane's grip. They'll destroy me. They'll try, but I won't let them succeed. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of decision. Finally, Tessa reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Kira sent me pictures. Before they took her phone, I saved them, kept them hidden. I thought maybe someday they would matter. She opened a folder of images. Sloane had seen similar photographs in war zones in the aftermath of interrogations and reprisals. Kira Holloway's battered face, bruises mapping the geography of her torso, the evidence of systematic brutality that no training accident could explain. These matter, Sloane said quietly, and so do you. Will you help me? Tessa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When she looked up again, something had changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with determination. What do I need to do? They talked for another hour, going over details, documenting everything Tessa could remember about the night Kira was attacked and the cover-up that followed. Names, dates, locations, the threats that had kept her silent, the guilt that had eaten at her for 2 months. By the time they parted, Sloane had enough testimony to support the physical evidence she had already gathered. Enough to build a case that even Rawlings' connections couldn't suppress. But she also knew that the clock was ticking faster now. Holt's threat had been explicit. They were planning to move against her, and the longer she remained at Fort Barrow, the greater the danger. She needed to transmit her evidence to Admiral Crawford. Tonight, before they had a chance to act. The attack came at 2300. Sloane was running her usual route around the track, using the exercise as cover for surveillance of the base's nighttime patterns. The desert air had cooled with sunset, and her breath formed small clouds in the darkness as she pushed through her 4th mile. She sensed them before she saw them. A subtle wrongness in the shadows behind the equipment building. Movement that didn't match the wind. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, faces covered, no insignia visible. They moved with professional coordination, spacing themselves to cut off her escape routes. Not cadets. These were trained operatives, Holt's mercenaries. The first one came fast, a telescoping baton extended and swinging for her head. Sloane ducked under the strike, stepping inside his guard and driving an elbow into his solar plexus. The impact folded him forward, and she followed with a knee to the face that sent him sprawling. The second attacker was more cautious, circling to her right, while the third closed from the left. Pincer movement, textbook ambush tactics. She exploded toward the one on her right, surprising him with aggressive forward movement. Her hand caught his weapon arm at the wrist, twisting sharply while her other palm struck upward into his chin. The combination broke his grip on the baton and snapped his head back hard enough to rattle his brain inside his skull. But the third one was on her now, and he was good. Better than the others. His strikes came in rapid combinations, forcing her to defend rather than attack. She blocked a hook to the ribs, slipped a jab aimed at her throat, but the follow-up kick caught her hip and sent her stumbling. Pain lanced through her left side. She rolled with the momentum, coming up in a defensive crouch as he pressed the attack. He was bigger, stronger, and fresh while she was already winded from the run. Standard tactics would get her killed. Time for something unexpected. Instead of retreating, she lunged forward deliberately inside his striking range. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, confused by the suicidal tactic. That fraction was all she needed. Her forehead slammed into his nose with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across her face as cartilage shattered. He staggered back, hands flying to his ruined face, and she followed with a savage kick to his knee that dropped him screaming to the ground. Silence fell over the scene. 3 attackers down, 2 unconscious, 1 writhing in agony. Sloane stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, her hip throbbing where the kick had landed. She could feel blood running from a cut above her eye opened when she had delivered the headbutt. Then she noticed what was missing. Her phone, the encrypted device she had been carrying in her pocket throughout the run. One of the attackers, the first one she had taken down, was crawling away. In his hand, her phone glinted in the moonlight. She caught him in 3 strides, slamming her foot down on his wrist. Bones crunched, and he screamed, releasing the phone. She scooped it up, checking the screen. Cracked but functional. The photos were still there. But the encrypted recorder, the one Admiral Crawford had given her, was gone. Torn from her collar during the fight without her noticing. All the audio evidence she had gathered, Rawlings' implicit threats, Holt's explicit ones, the conversation about neutralizing her, gone. Sloane stood in the darkness, blood dripping from her face, and forced herself to breathe. The situation had just become significantly more dangerous. They knew now that she couldn't be intimidated or eliminated through simple violence. Next time they would bring more people, better plans, lethal intent. She needed to find another way to get her evidence out, and she needed help. The thought came to her unbidden, a fragment of memory from the personnel files she had reviewed on her first day. Master Sergeant Warren Crace, 61 years old, and assigned to the weapons depot. A Desert Storm veteran who had been at Fort Barrow for 15 years, long enough to know where all the bodies were buried. And according to his service record, he had served in the same unit as Nate Sheridan during the Gulf War. It was a risk. Crace could be compromised, could be loyal to Rawlings, could be another threat she couldn't afford. But instinct told her otherwise. There was something in the way he had looked at her across the mess hall the day before. Recognition that went beyond simple awareness of the new transfer. He knew something, and she needed to find out what. Sloane cleaned herself up as best she could, using sand to absorb the blood and darkness to hide the evidence of the fight. Tomorrow she would have bruises that would be hard to explain. Tonight she had work to do. The weapons depot was on the far side of the base, a series of reinforced buildings surrounded by security fencing. At this hour, only a skeleton crew would be on duty. If Crace followed his usual pattern, he would be doing paperwork in the small office attached to the main armory. She found him there exactly as expected. A weathered man with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of stillness that came from decades of military service. He looked up as she knocked on the open door, his eyes taking in the cut above her eyebrow and the carefully controlled way she held her injured side. Trouble, his voice was graveled but calm. You could say that. Come in, close the door. She did, settling into the chair across from his desk, with a wince she couldn't entirely suppress. He watched her without speaking, waiting for her to begin. You served with Nate Sheridan. It wasn't a question, and he didn't pretend otherwise. Desert Storm, 3rd Armored Division. Nate was a staff sergeant, then barely 23 years old. Best soldier I ever knew. He died 3 weeks ago. Yemen. Took a bullet meant for me. Crace's expression flickered, pain quickly controlled, but his eyes stayed fixed on hers. I heard. Word travels in certain circles. He leaned forward slightly. You're the SEAL they have been whispering about. The one who put Kellner's boys in the infirmary. I'm the one who was sent to find out what's really happening at Fort Barrow, and I'm running out of time. She told him everything. The mission from Admiral Crawford, the evidence she had found, Tessa's testimony, the ambush that had cost her the audio recordings. Crace listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, staring at his hands. I've been here 15 years, he said finally. I've seen the rot spread a little more each year. Rawlings wasn't always like this. When he first took command, I thought he might actually clean the place up. But then the pressure started. From Washington, from the brass, who care more about metrics than morals. He made his first compromise, then his second, and before long, he couldn't tell the difference between protecting the institution and protecting himself. You knew about the cover-ups. I suspected, never had proof. His jaw tightened. My daughter served here, Lisa Crace, 5 years ago. She never told me what happened, but she wasn't the same after Fort Barrow. Something broke in her. She transferred out as soon as she could and never spoke about her time here again. Sloan understood then why he was willing to help. This wasn't just about justice, it was about redemption. A father's guilt for not seeing what was happening to his own child. I need to get my evidence to Admiral Crawford before the IG visit. But they're watching me now. Another attempt to transmit could tip them off. Crace nodded slowly. There's another way. Old command bunker underneath the administration building. Built during the Cold War, decommissioned in the 90s but never fully demolished. Rawlings uses it for storage, sensitive documents that he doesn't want in the regular archives. You think the original reports are there? I know they are. I've seen him access that bunker at odd hours carrying files that never show up in official records. Whatever he's hiding, whatever proof you need, it's down there. Can you get me in? I can disable the exterior cameras for a window. 30 minutes, maybe less, before someone notices. The bunker itself has a mechanical lock, an old rotary combination. I don't know the code, but a woman with your training should be able to figure it out. He reached into his desk drawer, producing a hand-drawn map of the administration building's basement level. Here, entrance is through the maintenance corridor behind the officer's lounge. The bunker access is at the end, disguised as a utility closet. Sloan studied the map, committing the layout to memory. This was the opportunity she needed, physical evidence that would corroborate everything else she had found. Why are you helping me? Crace met her eyes squarely. Nate Sheridan saved my life in Desert Storm. Pulled me out of a burning vehicle when everyone else had written me off. I've carried that debt for 30 years, never had a chance to repay it. He stood, moving to the window to stare out at the darkness beyond. And because I'm tired of watching good people get chewed up by a system that's supposed to protect them, tired of keeping my head down while the rot spreads. You're the first person in 15 years who's had both the evidence and the courage to do something about it. He turned back to face her. Tomorrow night, 0200. I'll disable the cameras at 1:55. You'll have 30 minutes. After that, you're on your own. Sloan rose, extending her hand. He took it, his grip firm and calloused from decades of handling weapons and machinery. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. Just make sure it counts. She left the weapons depot through a side entrance, moving through shadows toward her barracks. Her hip ached with every step, and exhaustion pulled at the edges of her consciousness. But beneath the pain and fatigue, something else burned. Hope. Tomorrow night she would find the proof she needed. The day after, the Inspector General would arrive, and then Fort Barrow's days of darkness would finally come to an end. In her bunk, Sloan lay awake, watching moonlight trace patterns across the ceiling. Her fingers found Nate's trident patch through the fabric of her duffel bag, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Almost there, she whispered. I'm keeping my promise. Outside, the desert wind picked up, sending sand skittering across the parade ground like whispered secrets. Somewhere in the administrative building, Captain Dean Rawlings was planning his next move. But Sloan Calder had a plan of her own, and unlike Rawlings, she had something worth fighting for. The truth. The basement corridor smelled of dust and forgotten decades. Sloan moved through the darkness with practiced silence, her footsteps barely audible against the concrete floor. The maintenance passage behind the officer's lounge was exactly where Crace had indicated a narrow tunnel that time and bureaucracy had erased from official building plans. Her watch read 0158, 2 minutes until Crace disabled the exterior cameras. 30 minutes after that before someone noticed the gap in surveillance footage. 30 minutes to find the evidence that would bring down Captain Dean Rawlings and everyone who had helped him bury the truth. The corridor stretched ahead of her, lined with pipes and electrical conduits that dated back to the Cold War era. Emergency lighting cast dim pools of amber every 20 feet, just enough illumination to navigate without a flashlight. She counted doors as she moved. Storage closet, mechanical room, electrical junction. And at the end, exactly as Crace had described, a door marked utility access that looked no different from the others, except for the lock. Modern installations used electronic keypads, biometric scanners systems that logged every access attempt. This door had a mechanical combination lock, the kind popular in the 1960s, virtually unpickable but also virtually untraceable. No digital footprint, no record of who came and went, perfect for hiding secrets. Sloan knelt before the lock, pressing her ear against the metal while her fingers worked the dial. Safe cracking was not standard SEAL training, but she had learned the basics during a joint operation with CIA assets in Afghanistan. The principle was simple. Listen for the click of tumblers falling into place. Feel the subtle resistance when the mechanism aligned. 3 minutes of patient manipulation revealed the first number, 17. 2 more minutes for the second, 43. The third took longest, a full 4 minutes of delicate adjustment before the final tumbler dropped and the lock released with a satisfying thunk. Sloan pulled the door open and descended into darkness. The bunker was larger than she had expected, a rectangular space roughly 30 feet by 40 feet, lined with metal shelving units that held decades of accumulated records. Filing cabinets stood against the far wall, their gray surfaces dulled by age. A single desk occupied the center of the room, bare except for a lamp and a telephone that probably hadn't worked since the Reagan administration. She clicked on her flashlight and began to search. The organization system, such as it was, appeared chronological. Older records near the back, newer ones toward the front. Sloan worked methodically scanning labels and pulling folders that matched the time frame she was investigating. The first cabinet yielded routine administrative documents. Supply requisitions, maintenance schedules, the mundane paperwork of military bureaucracy. She moved on. The second cabinet was more promising. Personnel files marked confidential filled the upper drawers, their contents documenting disciplinary actions, medical incidents, and discharge proceedings that had never made it into the official record system. She found Marcus Webb's original file, the one that documented defensive wounds instead of a training accident. She found Jennifer Paulson's case notes, the ones that described hazing severe enough to require hospitalization. And buried at the bottom of the third drawer, she found what she had been looking for. Kira Holloway's complete file. The folder was thick, stuffed with documents that told the full story of what had happened 2 months ago. The original incident report unredacted, witness statements from 3 cadets who had seen Kira stumbling back to her barracks bloodied and barely conscious. Photographs that made even Sloan's hardened stomach turn. And at the very back, a memo on Captain Dean Rawlings' personal letterhead. Subject: Holloway incident closure. Per discussion with Major Holt, all documentation related to the incident of June 15th is to be transferred to secure storage. Official record to reflect training accident classification. No further investigation warranted. Signed, Captain Dean Rawlings, Commanding Officer, Fort Barrow, Training Installation. Proof, undeniable, damning proof of a deliberate cover-up ordered by the base commander himself. Sloan photographed every page, her phone's camera, capturing the evidence that would end careers and possibly send people to prison. She checked her watch. 16 minutes remaining. Enough time to be thorough. She continued searching, pulling files that documented similar patterns going back 3 years. A systematic culture of abuse protected at the highest levels of Fort Barrow's command structure. Names repeated across multiple incidents. Bryce Kellner and his associates. Major Garrison Holt as the primary enforcer. Captain Rawlings as the architect of silence. And then she found something unexpected. A separate folder, unmarked, hidden behind the others in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet. Inside were communications between Rawlings and officials at the Pentagon. Emails printed and preserved discussing institutional reputation management and cadet retention metrics. Fort Barrow's abuse problem had been flagged by inspectors twice before. Both times pressure from Washington had quashed the investigations. Both times Rawlings had been praised for maintaining operational excellence in challenging circumstances. The corruption ran deeper than she had imagined. Not just a single base commander protecting his people. A network of institutional interests aligned against accountability, against truth, against the very soldiers they were supposed to serve. Sloan felt a familiar cold rage building in her chest, but she channeled it into focus, into purpose. This evidence would reach Admiral Crawford. It would reach the Inspector General. And then every person responsible for this system of abuse would face consequences. Her watch showed 8 minutes remaining. Time to leave. She was replacing the files, careful to leave no trace of her search when the lights came on. Captain Dean Rawlings stood at the top of the stairs, his service pistol drawn and aimed at her chest. Behind him, 2 military police officers blocked the exit, their expressions hard and professional. Lieutenant Calder. Rawlings' voice was ice. I had a feeling you'd find your way here eventually. Sloan straightened slowly, keeping her hands visible. Her mind raced through options, calculating distances, angles, probabilities. Two armed MPs plus Rawlings himself. Confined space with a single exit. No cover worthy of the name. Bad odds, but not impossible. Captain, she kept her voice level. I see your surveillance was more thorough than Sergeant Crace estimated. Rawlings descended the stairs with measured steps, never letting his aim waver. Crace, yes, I wondered who was helping you. Old soldier with a grudge and a guilty conscience. Predictable, really. Is that what you tell yourself, that everyone who opposes you is just nursing personal grievances? I tell myself what I need to survive. He reached the bottom of the stairs, positioning himself between her and the exit. Something you should have learned long ago, Lieutenant. This installation operates within certain parameters. Parameters that exist for good reason. Good reason? Sloan gestured toward the filing cabinets. Is that what you call covering up the assault of a 19-year-old cadet? Good reason? I call it institutional preservation. Fort Barrow has trained some of the finest soldiers in American military history. Generals, admirals, heroes who have served this nation with distinction. What happened to Cadet Holloway was regrettable, but it cannot be allowed to tarnish that legacy. Regrettable. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She was beaten nearly to death by her fellow soldiers. And you signed the paperwork that let her attackers walk free. Rawlings' expression didn't change. I made a decision, the same decision any commander makes when weighing individual harm against institutional good. Sometimes the math is ugly, Lieutenant. That's the burden of leadership. No, Sloan shook her head slowly. That's the excuse of cowardice. Leadership means holding people accountable, even when it's difficult. Even when it costs you something. What you've done here isn't leadership. It's complicity. For a moment, something flickered in Rawlings' eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the ghost of the honorable officer he had once been buried beneath years of compromise and moral decay. Then his jaw hardened, and the moment passed. Put the phone on the ground. Slowly. Sloan complied, placing the device at her feet. The evidence she had gathered, the photographs that could bring down the entire corrupt structure, now sat on cold concrete between them. What happens now, she asked. Now you disappear. Reassignment to a remote posting where you can't cause any more problems. Your report will indicate that Fort Barrow passed its evaluation with flying colors, and life will continue as it always has. And if I refuse, Rawlings smiled, but there was no warmth in it, then we'll have another unfortunate training accident. You wouldn't be the first transfer to suffer unexpected complications. Certainly won't be the last. Sloan measured the distance between them. 8 feet. The MPs were another 6 feet behind Rawlings, their weapons holstered, but hands ready. If she moved fast enough that she could disarm Rawlings before they reacted. Probably. But probably wasn't good enough. Not when the evidence was sitting on the floor, vulnerable to destruction. There's something you should know, she said quietly. And what's that? I sent preliminary findings to Admiral Crawford before your mercenaries jumped me. Encrypted transmission routed through Naval Special Warfare Command's secure servers. Not everything, but enough to raise red flags. Whatever happens to me tonight, questions are already being asked. Rawlings' expression flickered. She was telling the truth about the preliminary transmission, the one she had managed before the ambush. The photographs she had just taken were new evidence, but Crawford already knew enough to act. His expression flickered again. Uncertainty this time clear and unmistakable. You're lying. Am I? You know what I am, Captain. You've read my file. Do you really think I would walk into an unsecured location without a backup plan? Silence stretched between them. Rawlings' gun hand wavered slightly, the first sign of doubt she had seen from him. Then the bunker door burst open. Warren Crace stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, his weathered face pale with urgency. Captain, thus Inspector General's convoy just arrived. Early. They're at the main gate demanding entry. Rawlings spun toward him. What? They're not supposed to be here until tomorrow. Apparently there was a schedule change. Something about accelerated timeline based on new information received. Admiral Crawford, it had to be. Sloan had managed to transmit her preliminary findings before the ambush. Not the photographs, but enough to trigger concern. Enough to move up the inspection. Hope surged through her chest. Rawlings turned back to face her, his expression shifting from calculation to desperation. The carefully constructed walls were crumbling around him, and he knew it. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your word against mine. A disgraced transfer trying to save her career by making wild accusations. Except it's not just my word anymore." Sloan bent slowly, picking up her phone. "Tessa Whitmore has agreed to testify. She has photographs that Kira Holloway sent before you confiscated her phone. And everything in those filing cabinets is about to become evidence in a federal investigation." "Whitmore won't talk. She's too afraid." "People find courage in unexpected places, Captain, especially when they realize they're not alone." Heavy footsteps echoed from above. More people entering the building. The sound of authoritative voices demanding information. The IG team was inside Fort Barrow. Rawlings looked at his pistol, then at Sloan, then at the stairs leading up to the surface. For one terrible moment, she thought he might shoot her anyway. A final desperate act of a cornered man. Then he lowered his weapon. "It's over," Sloan said quietly. "Whatever happens next, the truth is coming out. The only question is whether you face it with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you make things worse for yourself." Rawlings said nothing, but she saw something collapse behind his eyes. The realization finally accepted that 30 years of service had ended in disgrace. He handed his pistol to one of the MPs and walked up the stairs without looking back. Sloan followed, emerging into the morning light just as a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the administrative building. Men and women in crisp uniforms stepped out, their expressions professional, their badges identifying them as agents of the Inspector General's office. The lead agent approached Rawlings, producing a document that Sloan recognized as a federal warrant. "Captain Dean Rawlings, you are hereby relieved of command, pending investigation into allegations of misconduct, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice." Rawlings accepted the document without protest. He seemed smaller now, diminished, the authority he had wielded for so long stripped away in a single moment. "Cooperate fully," the agent continued, "and things will go easier for you. Resist and you'll only make your situation worse." "I understand." They led him away. No handcuffs, not yet, but the humiliation was complete. A base commander escorted from his own installation like a common criminal. Sloan watched until they disappeared into one of the waiting vehicles. Then she turned and walked toward the parade ground where the rest of Fort Barrow was waking up to the most important day in its recent history. The investigation that followed was thorough, methodical, and devastating. Btch agents seized the contents of the underground bunker within hours, cataloging evidence that documented 3 years of systematic abuse and cover-up. Interviews were conducted with dozens of cadets, instructors, and staff members. Statements were taken, patterns were identified. Major Garrison Holt was arrested that same afternoon, charged with conspiracy assault and falsification of official records. He tried to run when they came for him, made it as far as the motor pool before military police brought him down. Bryce Kellner and his 3 associates were taken into custody the following morning. They would face court-martial proceedings on charges of assault, hazing, and conduct unbecoming. The same charges they had escaped so many times before, now inescapable. And in a quiet corner of the administrative building, Tessa Whitmore sat across from an IG investigator and told her story. Sloan watched through a window as the young cadet spoke. She could not hear the words, but she could see the transformation taking place. Tessa sat straighter now, her voice steady, her eyes meeting the investigator's gaze directly. The frightened girl who had hidden in corners and avoided attention was gone, replaced by someone who had found the courage to speak truth to power. That evening, 3 more female cadets came forward with their own stories. Then 4 more. By the end of the week, the investigation had documented 17 separate incidents of hazing, assault, or intimidation that had been covered up by Fort Barrow's command structure. Each testimony was a crack in the wall of silence that had protected the abusers for so long. Each voice added to a chorus that could no longer be ignored. The formal inquiry concluded 10 days after the IG team's arrival. Sloan was present for the announcement, standing at the back of the crowded assembly hall as the lead investigator delivered his findings. Based on the evidence gathered during this investigation, we have determined that Fort Barrow's command structure engaged in systematic suppression of incident reports, intimidation of witnesses, and falsification of official records. These actions constitute a fundamental betrayal of the trust placed in military leadership and a violation of the sacred duty to protect those under our command. He paused, surveying the assembled soldiers. Captain Dean Rawlings has been stripped of his rank and will face court-martial proceedings on multiple charges. Major Garrison Holt has been similarly charged. Additional disciplinary actions will be taken against all individuals found to have participated in or facilitated these abuses. The room was silent, hundreds of soldiers absorbing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Fort Barrow will undergo comprehensive restructuring under new leadership committed to the principles of honor, integrity, and accountability. We will not tolerate abuse in any form. We will not silence those who speak truth, and we will not forget the lessons that this shameful chapter has taught us. He straightened his voice, taking on a harder edge. To those who perpetrated these crimes, know this. The military justice system will hold you accountable for your actions. To those who remain silent while others suffered, know that complicity has consequences. And to those who found the courage to come forward, know that your bravery has changed this institution for the better. His eyes found Sloane's across the crowded room. Dismissed. 2 days later, Sloane's reassignment orders arrived. She was to return to Coronado, her evaluation mission complete. Admiral Crawford had included a personal note with the paperwork. Lieutenant Calder, your actions at Fort Barrow have exemplified the highest standards of military service. You confronted corruption at personal risk, protected those who could not protect themselves, and upheld the values that our uniform represents. Chief Sheridan would be proud. So am I. She read the note twice, then tucked it carefully into her duffel bag alongside Nate's trident patch. On her final morning at Fort Barrow, she woke before dawn and walked to the flagpole at the center of the parade ground. The desert air was cool, the sky just beginning to lighten along the eastern horizon. She stood there for a long time, watching the American flag catch the first rays of sunlight. So many people had passed through this installation over the decades. So many had served with honor, trained with dedication, gone on to protect the nation they loved. And some had been failed by the very institution that should have protected them. Ma'am, she turned to find Warren Crace approaching, his boots crunching softly on the packed earth. He carried 2 cups of coffee and offered one to her. Thank you, Sergeant. They stood together in silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. I got a letter from Lisa yesterday, Crace said finally. My daughter. First time she's reached out in 2 years. What did she say? She heard about what happened here, saw the news coverage. He paused, swallowing hard. She said she was proud of her old man. Said maybe now she could start telling me about what happened to her. Sloane nodded slowly. That's good, Sergeant. That's real good. It's because of you. What you did here. You gave people permission to speak, to stop being afraid. That's worth more than any medal or commendation. She thought about Nate Sheridan bleeding out in the Yemen darkness, about the promise she had made to protect those who could not protect themselves. I just did what any soldier should do, she said. The hard part is what comes next, making sure this never happens again. That takes everyone. Crace nodded. We'll do our part, those of us who stay. We'll make sure the next generation knows what Fort Barrow stands for. The real values, not the corrupted ones. Footsteps approached from behind. Sloane turned to see a small group of cadets walking toward the flagpole. Tessa Whitmore was among them, along with several others she recognized from the investigation. And in front, looking uncomfortable but determined, was Bryce Kellner. He stopped a few feet away, struggling to meet her eyes. Ma'am, his voice was rough, uncertain. I wanted to say something before you left. Sloane waited. We were idiots, that first night and everything before. We didn't think about what we were doing. It was just how things were, how they'd always been. That's not an excuse, I know that now. He swallowed hard. They're sending me to military prison. Court-martial convicted me last week. 18 months, then dishonorable discharge. My career is over, and I deserve it. I know that too. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze directly. But I wanted you to know that you changed something. Not just the rules or the leadership. Something in here. He touched his chest. I don't know if I can ever make up for what I did, but I'm going to try. For the rest of my life, I'm going to try to be better than I was. Sloane studied him for a long moment. The arrogant young man who had cornered her behind the vehicle depot was gone, replaced by someone humbled, broken but perhaps capable of redemption. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them right, cadet. That's what I told you that first night. It's still true. Yes, ma'am. The measure of a person isn't in the mistakes they make, it's in what they do afterward. You've got 18 months to think about the man you want to become. Use them wisely. He nodded, something like gratitude flickering in his eyes. Then he stepped back, making room for the others. Tessa Whitmore moved forward, her posture straight, her expression calm. The frightened girl from 2 weeks ago had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had faced her fears and emerged transformed. "I wanted to thank you," Tessa said, "for believing me, for giving me the courage to speak. You found that courage yourself. I just showed you it was possible." "Kira called me yesterday." Tessa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "First time since she was discharged. She saw the news too. She's thinking about coming back, maybe testifying at the trials. She said knowing that someone finally told the truth made her feel like she could stop running." Sloane felt something loosen in her chest, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. "That's what truth does," she said quietly. "It doesn't just punish the guilty, it heals the innocent, gives them back something that was stolen." The group of cadets stood together, a mixture of those who had been victims and those who were learning from their mistakes. Not friends, perhaps, not yet, but something new was forming between them, a recognition of shared humanity that had been impossible under the old regime. Fort Barrow was changing, one conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time, one person choosing integrity over silence. The sun had fully risen now, flooding the parade ground with golden light. In the distance, a bus rumbled toward the main gate, waiting to carry Sloane back to Coronado, back to her team, back to the shadows where America's quiet wars were fought. But she would carry this place with her, these people, this reminder of why the fight mattered. "I have to go," she said. Tessa stepped forward and embraced her briefly. Then Crace shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Take care of yourself, Lieutenant. You too, Sergeant. All of you." She walked toward the gate, duffel bag over her shoulder, the weight of Nate's trident patch pressing against her side. Behind her, the flag snapped in the morning breeze, red and white and blue against the endless Arizona sky. At the gate, she paused and looked back one last time. Fort Barrow spread before her, barracks and training grounds and parade fields that had witnessed both honor and horror. A place where young soldiers came to be forged into something greater than themselves. A place that had lost its way and was now finding it again. She thought about the inscription in Rawlings' office. Honor above all. Words were easy. Living them was hard. But sometimes when enough people found the courage to stand up, the words became real again. The bus doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. Sloane climbed aboard, found a seat near the back, and settled in for the long ride home. As the bus pulled away, she reached into her duffel and retrieved the frayed trident patch that had belonged to Nate Sheridan. She held it in her palm, feeling its weight, its history, the sacrifice it represented. "I kept my promise," she whispered to the empty seat beside her. "Whatever it takes." The desert rolled past the window, endless and ancient and indifferent to human struggles. But somewhere in that vastness, truth had prevailed. Justice had been served. And the ones who could not protect themselves had found a champion willing to stand in their place. That was enough. That was everything. Weeks later, an internal memo circulated through the Department of Defense. Subject: Fort Barrow Conduct Inquiry. Corrective action approved. New leadership protocols implemented. Enhanced oversight procedures activated. No names in the headline, no public fanfare. But those who knew remembered. And in the training manuals that followed, a new clause appeared on the first page before weapons qualifications or physical standards or tactical protocols. Respect is the first measure of readiness. Lieutenant Sloane Calder never returned to Fort Barrow. She went back to quiet operations, to training others in ethics and combat response, to the endless work of protecting a nation that rarely knew her name. But sometimes in the stillness of night, she remembered that morning on the parade ground. The sun rising over the desert, the flag catching the light, the faces of people who had found their courage because someone had shown them it was possible. Because in that moment, she had not been just a SEAL or a soldier or an instrument of military justice. She had been the embodiment of what the uniform was meant to protect: honor, integrity, and courage in silence. True courage is not measured by how hard you strike, but by knowing when and why you must stand. It is not about power, but principle. And sometimes the bravest act is not drawing a weapon. It is standing up when no one else will, even when you stand alone.